Tom Dunne. You didn't get very far from the studio today. Thanks for coming back in.
I didn't.
Now, to put you on the spot, name them.
That's a very hard question. They're tiny little intro sections, hardly anything at all.
There was a TV show years ago where I had to name it in one or two.
Fool's Gold was in the middle.
Yeah.
You know that from various radio shows.
Yeah.
Waterfall was second.
Yeah.
I'd say She Bangs the Drum was fourth. Resurrection has to be the first one.
Yeah.
And I'm gone on the last one.
I'll give you a clue.
Yeah.
It's a love song.
Love Spreads.
There you go.
They shoots, he scores. Have I won something?
No, you haven't. You've won another 5 minutes on the radio.
You're too kind to me. Kind to me.
Talk about the significance of this tonight, because the Stone Roses, they broke up. It was very acrimonious. They said they'd never come back together again. And judging on what had happened in Manchester last weekend, it's going to be an amazing gig.
I actually think the breaking up was the making of them in many ways for this comeback, because it gave them, they only had the one album, which was amazing, 1989 they released that, and then they went off in the difficult second album. Never, there was all these stories, what was going on in the studio. It was like the stuff of myth. It was like a novel really, what was going on. And then they released the album. It wasn't quite as good, and they called it a day, and it left this vacuum. It was almost like a James Dean element to the whole story, that you'd only had the one great album, you wanted more from the band, and for a whole generation they were the touchstone band. So many people grew up with this band, left home, had their first kiss, experimented or whatever, and they were the band they listened to when they went back to parties or back to somebody's house. They would have been the background music to such important, pivotal events in your life, and then to be gone away and just tantalisingly close. No, they're all still alive. It can come back together if you manage to pull it off. It just was perplexing people for years. So to get them back together, when this generation, they're all 41, 42, 43 now, the people who love them, are probably of their own kids getting into music.
It was interesting because I was watching on the BBC over the weekend at a stupid hour when the kids had me up. They had a report from the previous night in Manchester, and there were 17, 18-year-olds who were saying it was the best gig they were ever at, and who got you into it, and my dad always played the Stone Roses. So there's a whole new generation out there that want to hear them.
Yeah, and that is a strange thing. The generation gap has changed. Music has become such a thing that you genuinely can get your kids into it, and you find kids getting into bands that broke up years ago, punk rock bands even that broke up years ago. It's the way it is now. But in terms of the importance of the album, you really can't exaggerate it. 1967, Sgt. Pepper was the one. 78, it was the Sex Pistols. 1989, it was Stone Roses. They say a really once-in-a-lifetime album comes around every 7 years, or 11 years. It really was the once-in-a-lifetime album. Now,
I read somewhere these guys are going to make $3 million each by Christmas. It was well worth their while coming back.
Did you hear the story about, I think it was Manny, went shopping, and he wasn't sure if he had enough money in his bank account to pay for the shopping, so he decided to check his balance before he went into the supermarket. And when he checked his balance, it said he had 1.3 million in the account, and it was because the money, the advance for these gigs had just come through.
So he went all out, did he?
Yeah, but can you imagine that? He wanted to know if he had 20 quid in the account, and he had 1.3 million.
Well, sure,
they deserve it. I'm very on the musician side.
Yeah.
Very many great musicians make great music, and then it doesn't sell for whatever reason, and they disappear. And I feel guilty about that. They have to go back to normal life.
Wouldn't it be a good thing though if they decided after this series of concerts and they made their 3 million or whatever each, that then they decided, look, let's part ways again? Because if they started getting on the treadmill now and I don't know, maybe bringing out new material, it could be great, but the bar is already set very high for them.
Yeah, it's the hardest thing for any band to do, but I think these are in a position where they could do it because they've all stayed in music. Ian Brown has had his solo career. John Squire hasn't done much now, in fairness, but the others have stayed in bands, so they're still working musicians, if you know what I mean. Whereas, say for instance, Blur, two of them aren't working musicians anymore, so they couldn't do it. Pulp, many of them are not working musicians. So if any band is placed to follow it up and do something decent, and they must have unfinished business with this, they must know the second album was disappointment, and they must feel we still have something to prove.
But how close to the surface are the problems that were there in the first place, you'd have to ask?
They're mature now. They've probably dealt with far worse problems with their children since then. A bit of maturity has come into the play.
It's a big weekend for music because it's not only them. You've got Swedish House Mafia, Florence and Machine, Snow Patrol right across the weekend. All these small little gigs, and I know I'm saying small gigs, they're big, but are they making up for the lack of things like Oxygen, excuse me, which isn't happening this year? Slane isn't happening this year. Is this filling a void, or is it a stopgap?
And it's keeping people going, and you can get the sense of the way the bills are put together that you're trying to to, appeal to quite a broad range of musical tastes. But yeah, we're missing the big festivals, no doubt about it, and it's all down to the finances. So hopefully, with this bond market thing going well, if we're able to borrow money next year, the big festivals will return. I certainly miss
I'm sure that's what the NTMA have at the forefront of their mind.
I'm sure that's what it was all about.
There is a few other bits and pieces coming up. I mean, significant bits and pieces. Bruce Springsteen, 2 dates in the RDS.
Can't wait for that.
The reports from his other concerts again proved that he hasn't lost it at all. 4.5 hours he was on stage in Manchester.
Really?
Or was it Sunderland? I think he was in.
4.5
hours.
How amazing. I'm definitely going to that. I'm actually not going to the Stone Roses.
Oh, you're not? Where are you going?
Well, I had kind of argued that I'm too old to go to it. When you start thinking about your glass of wine and your book and getting to bed, or leaving before the gig is over because you're worried about the traffic.
Tom Dunne, you were supposed to be rock and roll. I mean, you look at the others around the station. George can hardly be described as rock and roll. I'm not rock and roll. You're the guy who's supposed to be at the cutting edge of this.
Rock and roll, but you know what's happened now instead? I'm going to be able to hear the gig but not go to it because my friend is home from America, Cormac Wright, and he's got tickets to go and see Pats tonight, who are playing their opening game in Europe. So I'm going to be standing in Richmond Park tonight, and that's very close to the Phoenix Park, so I'll be able to actually hear the Stone Roses.
So if it all goes south for Pats, at least you'll have something that'll entertain you.
This is the team we got past last year in Europe, so I'm very optimistic.
Well, it's a night you can enjoy that. I mean, you mentioned the Stone Roses breaking up earlier. The listeners got in contact to say, you could say for another Manchester band, if Oasis had packed it in after 2 albums, that they'd have an even bigger standing.
Let's face it, if they had called it a day after their first 2 albums, we'd better remember them. What came next over the next 3 albums wasn't very good at all, was it? I'm sure they know that as well. But would we have had all that entertainment? Those brothers
Probably not. Probably not. I mean, again, it's bands breaking up that provide the entertainment.
It's part of the mythology, isn't it? It makes it.
It'll happen to One Direction. It'll
Do you think really?
Too, I'm sure.
They've already reached such horrible, wonderful heights.
What's the highlight for you of the summer that's coming ahead now?
It's probably going to be Bruce, to be honest. I think he's just amazing, and I'm not mad about the new album, but he has so much incredible stuff. The new single is brilliant. I'd go Bruce. I think he's mesmerising. I know people who have travelled all around Europe to see every single one of his gigs, and I can understand it. Every night is something new. He's like, I don't know, he's like a great novelist or something on stage. There's so many levels to him. Madonna
played Slane in the past. She's playing the Aviva on the 24th.
I'll be at that.
Yeah, what's that going to be like? I mean,
it's going to be brilliant. One of the few things I did for Audrey was bring her to see Madonna in London. I actually paid for my tickets to bring her in, and it was a sensational gig. I went to the toilet at one stage. I can safely say that I was the only heterosexual man in the toilet. I don't know if that'll be the same.
Did you emerge?
I emerged unscathed. Yeah, it's grand. We've done it, but on a just observational level. That's all you can say. I was definitely the only man there.
But has she got a particular following? Because I heard her new song played on another radio station this morning, something to do with the radio, so she's guaranteed it's going to get airplay because she mentions the word radio in it. But all of the stuff she keeps putting out, it's a little bit samey these days, isn't it?
I think she's lost whatever kind of creative knew that she had at one point. At one point, she always used to align herself with whoever was the cutting edge producer in the world. Mirwai was the man at one point, and she always brought something out of them. William Orbit.
Yeah,
it just doesn't seem to be happening for her anymore, and you wonder maybe she has reached the point of no return. Maybe we no longer want new material from Madonna. We're happy with the stuff we have, and she just needs to accept that.
Prince doesn't bring out anything anymore, but people will still go and see him if he bothered to turn up to gigs.
Play the hits. Be relatively controversial.
Yeah.
Don't get your bits out. And we're grand.
Paul Simon, he's not going to be getting his bits out. He's at the O2 as well. A special Graceland tour. 25 years.
One of the greatest songwriters of all time.
25 years since Graceland came out.
I know, hard to believe. He played Vicar Street to a select and invited audience, and I wasn't able to go for various reasons, but apparently it's one of the greatest gigs of all time. He's the real deal. If you want to get a comparison, he's the Messi. He's the man who has the natural ability to write songs and put his hand on the right words at the right time. Sensational.
Somebody's asking, have you any advice for wet weather fans going along this evening?
You just have to accept it, don't you? You have to act like you're 20 and that it isn't really raining.
The only gig I ever went to, and again, you mentioned going to Madonna for Audrey. I went to Robbie Williams for my wife Colette many years ago as a support act, and it was in the Phoenix Park, and it was dry, but I can't imagine the Phoenix Park being pleasant if it's wet.
Well, I'll be in Richmond Park where there is roofs and proper facilities, so I'll let you know. I'll know quickly enough. I'll know from the vibes coming towards me.
All right, Tom Dunne, presenter of the Tom Dunne Show here just before us on News Talk Lunchtime. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks,
when the Happens reformed, you didn't get 3 million for that gig, did you?
We never split up.
You never split up.
As Alan said, we were never that organised.
That's your mistake. You could have made 3 million.
How could I spot it in them, not do it for us?
Tom, thanks very much indeed.